Hi, and welcome back to Happy Haute Home. Making a fabulous tree topper isn't as hard as it looks as long as you have the right materials. In my prior video, 5 steps to decorating a flocked tree to look like a designer Christmas tree, I discussed the steps to create a beautiful, professionally decorated, designer-looking Christmas tree. Today, I will show you how to get that designer-looking topper to go along with your designer-looking tree. Angels and stars are traditional and very pretty, but sometimes you want something a little bit different. A creative topper that says, "Wow, look at me." Finding the right topper materials can be tricky, especially if you wait until the last minute. You've heard me say it before, and I'll say it again. My advice is to always shop early as possible. To get the best pickings, you want to start perusing the Christmas decor aisle as soon as possible. Just set aside your items until you're ready to use them, but you'll have the satisfaction knowing you had first dibs, and first dibs are always nice. I found a lot of my tree topper materials at Joann. My topper consists of 5 elements plus 2 kinds of ribbon. When I create a topper, I suggest to pick a wide variety of interesting stems and ribbons. My tree is frosted, flocked, so I knew I wanted to include white in my topper. I also have red berries and red poinsettias on my tree, so I added red as well. To pull it all together, I started my cascading ribbon from the top of the tree and created loops, or so-called bows. I used 1 bunch of velvet poinsettias in the topper. I separate and cut the flowers so I can arrange them how I want, and I also angle the stems to face forward instead of upward. To create the topper, I start by laying stems on the floor and playing around with the design. In this particular picture, I started with 3 stems and I just crossed them over each other to create a fanned effect. To visualize the topper, I play around with varying designs. I keep adding stems to the arrangement until I'm happy with the look. For balance, I use an equal number, which is usually 3 of each, and create a fan effect, except for the glittery pine cones. I only used 2 of those. I do not recommend cutting the long stems. You will need them to attach to the tree. I add in the flower stems last. To this point, I have not attached any stems together. I'm just playing around with the arrangement to see what looks best. I used 6 white stems, 3 each of 2 varieties, 2 pine cone stems, and 1 bunch of flowers. Next, I'm going to start attaching all of the stems together, and to do this, I use zip ties. The stems are too heavy to tie all together with 1 zip tie, so I use several zip ties and group the stems together. In this picture, I grouped the flowers, the berries, and the small pine cones together. In this picture, I attached another group of stems to the bunch. I added the large glittery pine cones to the arrangement and attached another zip tie. Now it's time to group the larger, heavier stems with zip ties. I start with attaching only a few stems together. Trying to attach too many will not hold and it will topple over. In this picture, I'm adding in more stems and attaching the zip ties together. Continue adding in all your stems using additional zip ties each time. Lastly, I added in the grouping of flowers to the bunch. A glue gun comes in handy when the flower heads start to fall off. I use a drop of glue to attach the flowers back onto the stem. The topper is now ready to be attached to the tree. So this step usually requires a ladder. So all of the stems that are sticking out are useful when attaching the topper into the tree. I use the long stems to wedge them into the tree to hold the topper. Depending on the type of tree you have, you could use additional zip ties to attach the topper to the top branches of the tree. I didn't need to do that. My tree branches held the topper in place and were very sturdy without any additional zip ties. But depending on the type of tree, if it's more sparse or more wiry, you may need additional zip ties to hold the topper in place, since the topper is fairly heavy. So now it's time to add in the ribbon. I'm using two types of ribbon. The ribbon is 4 inches wide. Each ribbon is 4 inches wide, and it is wired on the edges. Wired ribbon is easiest to use on Christmas trees as it stays in place and it's easy to manipulate. I have a 4-inch wide ribbon because my tree is 9 feet high. If you only have a 7-foot tree, you can use thinner ribbon and it'll still give the same appearance. I added in 3 strands of ribbon to the Christmas tree. The first strand has 3 loops at the top. The second strand will have 2 loops, and the third strand will have a single loop. And I'm adding all of these to the topper. In this picture, I'm starting to create the first strand of 3 loops. And what I'm doing is I am creating 1 loop, and then I'm twisting it over to create the second loop on the first strand, if that makes sense. So next, I'm twisting the ribbon, overlapping it, and creating the second loop. So next, I'm creating the third loop, and I don't cut the ribbon when I create the loops for each strand. I am using one continuous piece for a grouping. In other words, for the grouping of 3 loops, that is 1 piece of ribbon, and then I cut it. When I create the grouping for the second group, that's a grouping of two loops, and that's 1 piece of ribbon. And then the third is 1 loop, and that's 1 piece of ribbon, if that makes sense. So I've created my first grouping of 3 loops, and I cut the ribbon. I do leave a tail on the end to allow it to flow down the tree. Next, I'm going to create a grouping of 2 loops, cut it, and then create a grouping of 1 loop and cut it. And it's just the same process that I created for the triple loop, for the double and the single loop. So then you'll have 3 different strands of a triple, a double, and a single loop. And now I can start to attach the groupings to the tree. So in this picture, I am attaching the first grouping of a triple loop at the very top of the tree near the topper. So the ribbon or the tail will loosely hang down the tree. And I probably leave maybe 1.5 to 2 feet for a tail just to cascade down the tree. So now I've added the second grouping of ribbon, which is a double loop, and I placed it just to the right side and below the triple loop on the tree. And again, it probably has about 1.5 to 2.5 feet of a tail hanging down, cascading down the tree, and it is grouped on the right side of the topper. And here we have the completed topper. As you can see, I added the third single loop to the left side of the topper. So coming down sort of in a zigzag pattern, I have a triple loop up on the left, and then a double loop on the right, and then we go back down to the left is where I added the single loop topper. I am adding it in with zip ties to attach it to the tree. And as you can see, I added in some additional red poinsettias right where to the right of the single loop, along with some berries. So that adds just like an extra layer of dimension. As you can see, I also add in stems, white magnolia stems to the tree. And for additional tips, again, I referenced how to 5 tips on creating a designer Christmas tree in another video. I encourage you to go ahead and look at that to see how I created the rest of the tree. But this is how the topper looks, and I really like it. It looked absolutely beautiful. And coming up, I will show you how the rest of the tree looks.